The piercing sound of shattering glass silenced the church social as Melody O'Sullivan's final note hung in the air, suspended like the fragments of the crystal punch bowl now scattered across the wooden floor. The whispers began immediately, cruel and cutting as the shards at her feet. She stood frozen at the small upright piano, her trembling fingers still hovering over the ivory keys, her voice dying in her throat as she watched Mrs. Harriet Wilson's horrified expression at the ruined refreshment table. That screeching was enough to break more than just glass, someone muttered, loud enough for all to hear. Melody's cheeks burned as laughter rippled through the gathering. The church social of 1878 in Broken Creek, Wyoming territory, had been her chance to finally find acceptance in the tight-knit community. 3 months since arriving from Boston to live with her aunt, and still an outsider. I told Reverend Phillips that letting the new girl perform was a mistake, Mrs. Wilson announced, dabbing at her punch-stained dress. Some people simply weren't blessed with talents worth sharing. Melody gathered her sheet music with shaking hands, willing herself not to cry. Not here, not in front of everyone. Her Aunt Martha stood by helplessly, her own position in town too precarious to defend her niece against the church matriarch. I believe I'd like to hear the rest of that song. The deep voice cut through the murmurs, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Owen Elkins stood at the entrance of the church hall, his tall frame silhouetted against the late afternoon sun streaming through the doorway. The infamous lone cowboy of the Double Cross Ranch removed his hat as he stepped inside, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and eyes the color of aged whiskey. Mr. Elkins, Reverend Phillips hurried forward. What a surprise to see you at our social. We weren't expecting. I heard singing, Owen interrupted, his gaze finding Melody's mortified face. Finest voice I've heard since leaving Tennessee. He crossed the room with unhurried confidence, ignoring the stares that followed him. His spurs jingled softly against the wooden floorboards, marking each deliberate step. Mrs. Wilson huffed. Well, I never. Madam. Owen tipped his head politely in her direction, without slowing his approach to the piano. When he reached Melody, he placed his hat on top of the upright and pulled a battered harmonica from his pocket. Miss, I'd be honored if you'd start again. I know this tune, and I'd like to join you, if you don't mind. Melody stared at him, this stranger who'd appeared like an apparition to rescue her from humiliation. She'd seen him from afar in town, heard the whispers about the solitary cowboy who worked for the wealthiest rancher in the county but kept to himself. The man who spoke little but watched everything. I don't know if I should, she whispered, glancing at the hostile faces surrounding them. Don't sing for them. Owen's voice was low, meant only for her. Sing because your heart has something to say. Melody's fingers returned to the keys, hesitantly at first. Then with growing confidence as she found the opening notes of Shenandoah. Owen brought the harmonica to his lips, joining her after the first verse with a haunting counter-melody that seemed to rise from the very soil of the frontier. His playing wasn't perfect, but it was soulful, complementing her voice in ways she hadn't imagined possible. When the final notes faded, the silence that followed was different, stunned, rather than mocking. Owen pocketed his harmonica and reclaimed his hat. Thank you, Miss O'Sullivan. Melody O'Sullivan. Miss O'Sullivan. He nodded respectfully. Owen Elkins. I hope to hear you sing again someday. He turned to leave, and Melody felt a strange panic rise in her chest at the thought of watching him walk away. Mr. Elkins, she called, surprising herself with her boldness. The church is organizing a charity concert next Sunday after services, to raise money for the new schoolhouse. He paused, turning back to her with a question in his eyes. Would you consider playing alongside me again? Melody asked, ignoring the scandalized gasps around her. A young, unmarried woman asking a man, especially one with Owen Elkins' reputation, to accompany her in public was practically unheard of. The corner of his mouth lifted in the barest hint of a smile. Sunday after services, then. He settled his hat back on his head and nodded to Reverend Phillips before walking out, the heavy church door closing behind him with a solid thud. Melody became aware of the stairs, the whispers building again like an approaching storm. But something had changed inside her. For the first time since arriving in Broken Creek, she stood a little straighter, lifted her chin a little higher. "Well?" Mrs. Wilson broke the silence, her voice dripping with disapproval. "I suppose we now know what kind of girl Boston has sent us." "The kind who can sing with angels, Harriet," Reverend Phillips said mildly, surprising everyone with his defense. "And perhaps we should be grateful that Mr. Elkins has finally found his way to our church, even if only for a social. The Lord works in mysterious ways." Melody gathered her remaining dignity and joined her aunt, who looked equal parts proud and terrified. As they walked home in the fading light, Martha finally spoke. "That was quite a performance, Melody, both the singing and afterward." "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you, Aunt Martha." "Embarrassed?" Martha chuckled softly. "My dear, you've just managed what no one in this town has accomplished in 3 years. You've drawn Owen Elkins out of his shell. The man hasn't participated in a town event since he arrived." "Who is he, really?" Melody asked, curiosity overcoming propriety. Martha sighed. "No one knows much. He came west after the war, works harder than any two men at the Double Cross, but keeps to himself. There are rumors, of course." "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that follow any man who prefers solitude," Martha replied. "Some say he was a sharpshooter in the war and can't forgive himself for the lives he took. Others claim he's running from the law or from a broken heart. All I know is he's always been respectful and pays his bills promptly when he comes to the general store." Melody thought about his eyes, the way they seemed to hold stories too heavy to share. "He plays beautifully." "And you sing beautifully." Martha squeezed her niece's hand. "Though I'm not sure Mrs. Wilson will ever forgive you for the punch bowl." They laughed together as they approached the small house behind the general store that Martha had called home since her husband's death 5 years earlier. Melody helped her aunt prepare supper, but her mind kept returning to the mysterious cowboy and the way his harmonica seemed to speak directly to her soul. The week passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Melody practiced her songs daily, ignoring the occasional pointed comments from customers at her aunt's store. By Saturday, word had spread throughout Broken Creek that the Boston girl and the reclusive cowboy would be performing together, and opinions were divided on whether it would be a spectacle worth witnessing or a scandal to be condemned. Sunday morning arrived bright and clear. Melody wore her best dress, a modest blue cotton with white lace trim that brought out the sapphire in her eyes. She'd spent extra time arranging her chestnut hair, pinning it up in a style that was neither too elaborate to appear vain nor too simple to suggest carelessness. "You look lovely," Martha assured her as they walked to church. "Remember to hold your head high. You've done nothing wrong." The service seemed interminable. Melody scanned the congregation repeatedly, but Owen Elkins was nowhere to be seen. As the final hymn concluded, disappointment settled heavily in her chest. He wasn't coming. People filed out of the church toward the adjacent field where tables had been set up for the charity concert and picnic. Melody followed, resigning herself to either performing alone or making excuses to withdraw from the program entirely. "Miss O'Sullivan." She turned to find Owen approaching from the direction of the hitching posts, not the church. He'd clearly arrived for the concert, not the service. He wore a clean black shirt under a dark vest, his usual trail-worn pants replaced with what appeared to be his Sunday best. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair. In his hands, he held not just his harmonica, but a guitar case as well. Mr. Elkins, she breathed, relief washing over her. You came. I said I would. His expression remained serious, but his eyes softened when they met hers. I brought along something extra, if that's acceptable. He nodded toward the guitar case. Of course, she smiled. I didn't know you played guitar as well. There's a fair bit people don't know, he replied, then added more quietly, myself included sometimes. They walked together to the small platform that had been erected for the performers. Reverend Phillips announced them as the opening act, his voice carrying across the gathering with undisguised enthusiasm. Ladies and gentlemen, to begin our charity concert for Broken Creek's new schoolhouse, Miss Melody O'Sullivan and Mr. Owen Elkins will perform several selections. They took their places on the platform. Owen removed his guitar from its case, a beautiful instrument with inlaid mother-of-pearl around the sound hole. He tuned it quickly, his fingers moving with practiced ease across the strings. What shall we play first? Melody whispered. How about Barbara Allen? He suggested. Traditional, everyone knows it. She nodded, surprised by his choice of the tragic ballad, but trusted his instinct. Owen strummed the opening chords, and Melody began to sing the tale of hard-hearted Barbara Allen and the young man who died for love of her. The audience fell silent as her clear soprano voice carried across the field. Owen's guitar provided perfect accompaniment, and when he added harmonies in the chorus, his deep baritone blended with her voice in a way that sent shivers down Melody's spine. By the time they reached the verse about the briar and the rose entwined, several women in the audience were dabbing at their eyes. They continued with Down in the Valley and The Water is Wide, each song telling stories of love and longing that seemed to resonate with the frontier audience. For their final piece, Owen suggested Amazing Grace, and as the last notes faded, a spontaneous applause erupted from the crowd. Reverend Phillips returned to the platform beaming. I believe we'll need Miss O'Sullivan and Mr. Elkins to favor us with an encore after the other performers have had their turn. They stepped down from the platform, both slightly dazed by the warm reception. Mrs. Wilson approached, her expression carefully neutral. That was quite moving, she admitted grudgingly. Perhaps we could discuss your participation in the church choir, Miss O'Sullivan. We practice on Wednesday evenings. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I'd be honored, Melody replied, hardly believing the change in the woman's attitude. As Mrs. Wilson moved away, Owen leaned closer. See what happens when you don't let them silence you? I have you to thank for that, Melody said. If you hadn't come to the social that day, you would have found your voice again, one way or another, he interrupted. Some songs are too important to keep inside. They watched the other performance's children reciting poetry, a quartet of minors singing old work songs, and Reverend Phillips himself playing a surprisingly spirited fiddle. Throughout it all, Owen remained by Melody's side, occasionally offering quiet observations that made her smile or explaining aspects of frontier life she was still learning. For their encore, they performed Wayfaring Stranger, Owen's voice taking the lead this time with Melody providing harmony. Something in the way he sang about being a poor wayfaring stranger traveling through this world of woe made Melody wonder about the burdens he carried. As the concert concluded and people began to disperse, Owen carefully returned his guitar to its case. That belonged to my father, he said when he caught her admiring it. One of the few things I brought west with me. It's beautiful, she replied, and you play it wonderfully. An awkward silence fell between them, neither quite ready to part ways, yet unsure how to extend their time together. Miss O'Sullivan, Owen finally said, would you permit me to call on you properly? Perhaps next Sunday after church? Melody's heart fluttered. I would like that very much, Mr. Elkins. Owen, he corrected gently. If we're to be friends, I'd prefer you called me Owen. Owen, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. Then you must call me Melody. He nodded, a genuine smile transforming his solemn face. Until next Sunday, Melody. She watched him walk away, his tall figure cutting through the dispersing crowd. Only then did she notice her aunt standing nearby, observing their exchange with an expression that mixed concern with something that looked remarkably like hope. "Shall we go home?" Martha asked, taking her niece's arm. "Yes," Melody replied, her mind already racing ahead to next Sunday. "I believe we shall." True to his word, Owen Elkins appeared at Martha O'Sullivan's door the following Sunday after church services. He stood on the small porch, hat in hand, looking both determined and uncertain. Martha invited him in for Sunday dinner, an invitation he accepted with formal politeness that barely masked his nervousness. Conversation flowed more easily than any of them expected. Owen spoke of his work at the Double Cross Ranch, his respect for the ranch owner, Oliver Blackwood, and his hope to someday have a spread of his own. When asked about his past, he was vague, but not evasive, mentioning Tennessee, service in the war, and his decision to head west afterward. "The past is a foreign country," he said simply. "I prefer to live in the present." After dinner, Martha conveniently remembered mending she needed to complete for Mrs. Peterson and retreated to her bedroom, leaving Owen and Melody to sit on the small porch as the summer evening settled around them. "Your aunt is very kind," Owen observed, rocking gently in the chair Martha had offered him. "She saved me," Melody admitted. "After my parents died of influenza last winter, I had nowhere to go. Aunt Martha was my father's only living relative, and she didn't hesitate to send for me, even though we'd never met." "That kind of generosity is rare," he agreed. "I'm sorry about your parents." "Thank you." Melody studied her hands for a moment. "I miss them terribly, but I'm starting to find my way here. It's different from Boston, simpler in some ways, harder in others." Owen nodded. "The West demands more of people physically but offers a kind of freedom you can't find back east." "Is that why you came? For freedom?" He was quiet for so long that Melody thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I came because I couldn't stay. After the war, home didn't feel like home anymore." "I understand that feeling," she said softly. "When my parents died, our house became just a building filled with memories I couldn't bear to face every day." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing beyond her pretty face to the person beneath. "You're stronger than you know, Melody O'Sullivan." "As are you, Owen Elkins," she replied, holding his gaze. When he left that evening, he asked permission to call on her again the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. Each visit revealed another layer of the man behind the solitary cowboy reputation, his dry sense of humor, his reverence for the natural beauty of Wyoming, his quiet intelligence evidenced by the dog-eared books he sometimes brought to share with her. By midsummer, their musical partnership had become a regular feature at church events and town gatherings. The people of Broken Creek gradually accepted the unlikely pair, the refined Boston girl with the voice of an angel, and the silent cowboy whose music seemed to emerge from the very landscape around them. On a warm August evening, Owen arrived unexpectedly at the general store just as Martha was closing up. He looked agitated, his usual composure replaced by nervous energy. "Miss Martha, I was hoping I might speak with Melody," he said, twisting his hat in his hands. Martha raised an eyebrow but called for her niece, who emerged from the storeroom with a ledger in her hands. "Owen!" Melody's surprise quickly turned to concern when she saw his expression. "Is everything all right?" "I was wondering if you might take a walk with me," he said. "There's something I need to discuss with you." Martha cleared her throat. "It's nearly dusk, Mr. Elkins." "I'll have her back before full dark, madam," he promised. "We'll just go as far as the schoolhouse and back." With Martha's reluctant approval, they set out toward the newly completed schoolhouse at the edge of town. Owen was uncharacteristically quiet, even for him. "You're worrying me," Melody finally said as they reached the empty building. Has something happened? Owen took a deep breath. Mr. Blackwood has offered me a promotion. He wants me to become his foreman. Owen, that's wonderful, Melody exclaimed, genuinely pleased for him. But his continued solemnity gave her pause. Isn't it? It comes with the old Carson place, he continued. 50 acres and a small house that needs work but solid. Part of my compensation would be eventual ownership of the land. Melody's heart began to race. That sounds like exactly what you've been working toward. It is. He turned to face her directly, taking both her hands in his. But I find I can't accept it without knowing, without asking if there might be a chance. If you might consider. He faltered, then squared his shoulders and started again. Melody O'Sullivan, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought music back into my world when I thought it was gone forever. I know I'm not the kind of man you probably dreamed of in Boston, but I swear I would spend every day trying to make you happy if you would do me the honor of becoming my wife. Melody felt tears spring to her eyes. Owen. His face fell. I understand if you need time to consider or if your answer is no. I know I'm asking you to accept a hard life. And she silenced him by rising on her tiptoes and pressing her lips gently to his. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with surprise and dawning hope. Yes, she whispered. My answer is yes. His arms wrapped around her, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that felt like coming home. When he set her down again, they were both laughing and crying at once. We should go tell your aunt, he said, suddenly remembering his promise to return her before dark. They walked back to the general store hand in hand, their steps light with shared joy. Martha took one look at their faces and knew immediately what had transpired. I see congratulations are in order, she said, her voice thick with emotion. If you'll give us your blessing, madam, Owen said formally. Martha looked between them, seeing the unmistakable love shining in their eyes. You have it, with all my heart. They were married on a crisp October day in 1878, with the aspen trees turning gold against the deep blue Wyoming sky. The entire town turned out for the wedding, including Mrs. Wilson, who had become one of Melody's staunchest supporters after hearing her sing Ave Maria at the church's Harvest Festival. After the ceremony, Owen surprised Melody by leading her to a wagon laden with their wedding gifts. On top was a piano smaller than the one in the church, but polished to a high shine. How did you? She gasped, running her fingers reverently over the keys. Mr. Blackwood helped arrange it, Owen admitted. Said every ranch wife needs something of her own to bring beauty to the hard days. They drove to their new home as husband and wife, the little house on the Carson place transformed by Owen's hard work over the previous weeks. He had repaired the roof, fixed the porch, and painted the exterior a cheerful yellow that reminded Melody of sunflowers. Inside, he had arranged for simple but sturdy furniture, with the piano taking pride of place in the small parlor. That night, as darkness fell, they sat together on the bench, Melody playing softly while Owen sang, their voices blending in the intimacy of their own home. When she finally stopped playing, he took her hands and kissed them one by one. I never told you why I came to the church social that day, he said, the one where we first met. I always wondered, she admitted. You didn't seem the type to attend social gatherings willingly. I was riding fence that afternoon, about a mile from town, he explained. The wind was just right, and I heard your voice floating across the valley. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, and I followed it without even thinking. By the time I reached the church, all I could hear was laughter, and I knew something had gone wrong. Melody shook her head in wonder. If you hadn't come in just then. If you hadn't been brave enough to keep singing, he countered. We found each other because you refused to be silenced. He drew her close, his kiss deeper now, more urgent. As the prairie night enveloped their small house, Melody surrendered to the love she'd found in this unexpected place. With this unexpected man who had heard her voice when everyone else had only heard their own expectations. The first year of marriage brought challenges neither had fully anticipated. The winter of 1878-1879 was brutally cold, testing the limits of their preparation and resilience. Owen worked long hours with the double-cross herd, often returning home after dark, exhausted and half-frozen. Melody learned to manage a ranch household, to cook on a temperamental wood stove, to stretch provisions when snowstorms made trips to town impossible. Yet even in the hardest times, they found joy together. On bitter evenings when the wind howled outside their snug cabin, they would sit by the fire, Owen with his guitar, Melody at her piano, creating music that warmed them from within. They developed their own traditions, reading aloud to each other from Owen's collection of books, telling stories from their childhoods, planning for the future they would build together. Spring came late but gloriously in 1879. As the land awakened from its winter sleep, so too did new possibilities for the young couple. Owen's position as foreman brought stability they hadn't dared count on, and Melody found unexpected fulfillment in teaching music to the children at the new schoolhouse one afternoon each week. It was a perfect May morning when Melody discovered she was with child. She waited until evening to tell Owen, watching his face transform with wonder and joy when she shared the news. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." The pregnancy progressed well through the summer months. Melody's Aunt Martha visited often, bringing advice and small gifts for the coming child. The women of Broken Creek, even Mrs. Wilson, rallied around the young mother-to-be, sharing wisdom and hand-me-down baby clothes. In late October, just after their first wedding anniversary, Melody went into labor during a sudden early snowstorm. Owen rode through the blinding snow to fetch the doctor, returning with not only the physician, but also Martha and the midwife. After 18 hours of labor, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that Owen swore was musical even then. They named her Lily, for the calla lilies that had decorated the church on their wedding day. "She has your eyes," Melody whispered, exhausted but radiant as she cradled their newborn. "And your spirit," Owen replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Look how fiercely she holds on." Indeed, the tiny girl had wrapped her fingers around her father's calloused thumb with surprising strength, as if claiming him as her own. The years that followed brought more children: a son, Thomas, born in 1881, and twin girls, Sarah and Emma, who arrived unexpectedly in the spring of 1883, turning their ordered life upside down in the most wonderful way. Through it all, music remained the heartbeat of their home. Owen taught the children to play guitar and harmonica, while Melody gave piano lessons and nurtured their singing voices. Sunday evenings became a tradition in Broken Creek, with neighbors gathering at the Elkins Ranch for informal concerts where everyone was welcome to participate. By 1885, Owen had fulfilled the terms of his agreement with Mr. Blackwood and officially became the owner of their 50 acres. With careful management and hard work, they were able to purchase an adjoining parcel of land, expanding their small ranch and their dreams simultaneously. That same year, Aunt Martha decided to sell the general store and move to the ranch to help with the children, allowing Melody to accept a position as the music teacher at the school. The arrangement benefited everyone. Martha found purpose in caring for her great nieces and nephew. The children thrived under her loving attention, and Melody was able to share her passion for music with a new generation of Wyoming children. In the summer of 1888, 10 years after that fateful church social, Broken Creek celebrated its 20th anniversary as a settlement with a week of festivities. The highlight was a special concert featuring performers from throughout the territory, with Melody and Owen serving as both organizers and headliners. On the final night, as the sun set behind the mountains, they took the stage together just as they had a decade earlier. Owen's hair now had strands of silver at the temples, and parenthood had softened Melody's once slender figure. But when they began to sing, the years fell away. They performed all the old favorites, joined occasionally by their children, who had inherited their parents' musical gifts. For their final number, Owen stepped forward. 10 years ago, I heard an angel singing and followed her voice to the church in town. He told the audience, his eyes finding melodies. What I found there changed my life forever. This song is for the woman who taught me that even the most wounded heart can learn to sing again. He began to play a melody Melody had never heard before, and then sang a song he had written just for her, a ballad about a lost cowboy, and the woman whose voice led him home. By the final verse, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. As applause thundered around them, Owen leaned close to his wife. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" she asked, squeezing his hand. "For singing beside me, that day and every day since." Later that night, as they sat on their porch watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Wyoming sky, their children asleep inside and the sounds of the night settling around them, Melody reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever miss Boston?" Owen asked, seeming to read her thoughts. She considered the question seriously. "I miss certain things, the libraries, the theaters, the convenience of city life," she admitted. "But I've never once regretted coming here." "Even when Mrs. Wilson broke that punch bowl and blamed your singing?" he teased. Melody laughed. "Even then, though I might have regretted it if a certain cowboy hadn't appeared in the doorway at exactly the right moment." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm the way he had done for years. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been riding fence that day, if the wind had been blowing the other direction." "I believe we would have found each other anyway," she said with quiet conviction. "Some songs are meant to be sung together." Owen nodded, drawing her close against the cooling night air. "I love you, Melody Elkins. More today than yesterday, and not as much as I will tomorrow." "And I love you, my wayfaring stranger," she whispered back. "Thank you for finding your way to me." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of their ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft whickering of horses in the barn, the gentle creak of the windmill turning in the breeze. The music of the life they had built together, note by painstaking note, into a symphony all their own. In the years that followed, the Elkins Ranch prospered and grew. Owen's knowledge of cattle and land management, combined with Melody's meticulous bookkeeping and business sense, transformed their modest beginnings into one of the most respected small ranches in the territory. When Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, they hosted a celebration that brought together ranchers, townspeople, and even a delegation of Shoshone from the nearby reservation with whom Owen had established respectful trading relations. Their children grew as surely as their ranch. Lily, their firstborn, revealed a talent for medicine that led her to study with the town doctor before eventually attending medical school in Denver, a bold choice for a young woman in the 1890s, but one her parents supported wholeheartedly. Thomas, steady and thoughtful like his father, showed an innate understanding of the land and animals that made him the natural heir to the ranching operation. The twins, Sarah and Emma, as different as two sisters could be despite their identical appearance, found their own paths. Sarah as a teacher, who eventually took over Melody's position at the school, and Emma as an accomplished horsewoman who could outride most of the cowboys in the county. Music remained the thread that bound the family together through celebrations and sorrows. When Aunt Martha passed peacefully in her sleep in 1892, they gathered around the piano to sing her favorite hymns, finding solace in harmony when words failed them. When Thomas returned from a cattle drive with his first heartbreak, His father took out the guitar and taught him new songs that spoke of resilience and hope. When Lily announced her engagement to the son of the bank president in 1898, the wedding featured a special duet performed by the bride's parents, who still sang together as if they were the only two people in the room. In 1903, 25 years after that first church social, Broken Creek had grown from a frontier settlement to a proper town, with a railway station, a bank, and even a small opera house built largely through Melody's fundraising efforts. To celebrate their silver anniversary, Owen surprised Melody with a trip back east, her first return to Boston since leaving as a grief-stricken young woman. They visited her childhood home, now occupied by strangers who nevertheless welcomed them kindly when they explained the purpose of their visit. They attended performances at the theaters Melody had loved, Owen watching her face more than the stages. They walked through the public garden where she had played as a child, and he listened as she pointed out her favorite spots with the enthusiasm of a girl rather than a woman in her mid-40s. On their final night in Boston, they attended a symphony performance at the newly built Symphony Hall. Dressed in their finest clothes, they were the picture of respectable middle-aged prosperity, Owen's weathered face and strong hands the only real indication of his years of physical labor, Melody's graceful bearing and confident smile reflecting the fulfillment she had found in her unexpected life. As the orchestra played Dvorak's New World Symphony, Owen watched his wife's face, illuminated by the gaslight, and saw the girl she had been and the woman she had become both equally beautiful to him. When the famous Largo movement began, with its haunting melody reminiscent of a spiritual, he saw tears glisten in her eyes. "What are you thinking?" he whispered. "That I'm hearing the voice of my two worlds together," she replied softly. "The east of my childhood and the west of my heart." He took her hand, an echo of countless moments shared over 25 years of marriage. Back in Wyoming, life continued its steady rhythm. The railroad brought changes to ranching operations, and the arrival of the automobile began to transform the distances that had once seemed so vast. The Elkins Ranch adapted and thrived, embracing new methods while maintaining the values that had sustained it from the beginning: hard work, honesty, and harmony with the land. In 1910, at the age of 54, Melody published a collection of songs she had composed over the years, arrangements that blended traditional frontier melodies with the classical training of her youth. The book found unexpected success, used by music teachers throughout the West, and even finding its way into conservatories back east. Owen couldn't have been prouder, telling anyone who would listen that he had known from the first note he'd heard her sing that his wife's voice was meant to reach far beyond their small corner of Wyoming. That same year, Thomas married a capable young woman from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the expanded Elkins property, ensuring the continuation of the family legacy. The twins, now 27, had established their own lives. Sarah married to the town's newspaper editor and raising 3 children who often spent summers at the ranch with their grandparents. Emma running a successful horse breeding operation from a corner of the family land. Only Lily remained distant, her medical practice in Denver keeping her busy, though her letters home were frequent and full of stories about her patients and her continued advocacy for women's suffrage. When Wyoming celebrated the 40th anniversary of women's right to vote, a right the territory had granted long before statehood or federal recognition, Lily returned home to give a speech at the town celebration, making her parents burst with pride. The outbreak of the Great War in Europe in 1914 cast a shadow even on their remote corner of Wyoming. Though America remained officially neutral, the effects of the conflict rippled through the economy and the national consciousness. When the United States finally entered the war in 1917, Thomas's oldest son, just 18, immediately enlisted, despite his grandfather's quiet warnings about the realities of combat drawn from experiences half a century old but still vivid in memory. It was during this period of national anxiety that Owen and Melody, now in their 60s, found themselves returning to the core of their relationship, the music that had first brought them together. With gasoline rationed and travel restricted, the community once again gathered regularly at the Elkins Ranch for evening concerts that offered comfort and continuity in uncertain times. On one such evening in the summer of 1918, as they sat together on the porch after the neighbors had departed, Owen took out his father's old guitar, now lovingly preserved, though rarely played as arthritis had begun to stiffen his once nimble fingers. "Do you remember the first song we ever performed together?" he asked, carefully tuning the instrument. "Barbara Allen," Melody replied immediately. An odd choice for a first duet. Looking back, such a sad tale. "I had my reasons," Owen admitted with a small smile. "I wanted to see if you could handle the emotion of it. If you were the kind of singer who just made pretty sounds, or if you understood the heart of a song." "And?" she prompted, settling beside him on the porch swing. "You made me believe that Barbara Allen truly regretted her cruelty, that the roses and briars really did twine together over those graves." His voice softened. "I think I started falling in love with you right then, though I wouldn't have admitted it even to myself." Melody leaned her head against his shoulder, the familiar contours of his body as comforting as the Wyoming landscape around them. "Play it again," she requested, "for old time's sake." He did, his fingers finding the chords despite the stiffness in his joints, and Melody's voice rose clear and true in the evening air. Older now, deeper, with a richness that only life experience could bring, but still unmistakably the voice that had drawn him to the church door 40 years earlier. When they finished, they sat in silence, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains with golden light. "We've had a good life, haven't we?" Melody asked eventually. "The best," Owen confirmed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was wandering after the war, certain there was nothing left for me in this world." "There was me," she said simply, "waiting for you, though I didn't know it yet." "There was you," he agreed, setting aside the guitar to take her hand. "My melody in a discordant world." In the spring of 1919, as the world began to recover from both war and pandemic, the Elkins family gathered for a reunion that brought all four children and their families back to the ranch. Lily arrived with unexpected news at 40. She had finally agreed to marry her longtime colleague, a kind doctor who had worked alongside her treating influenza patients during the worst of the outbreak. "I never thought I'd marry," she confessed to her parents. "I was too focused on my work. But David, he understands me. He doesn't ask me to be less than I am." "The best marriages are partnerships of equals," Melody told her daughter, glancing at Owen with a smile. "Your father never once asked me to silence my voice." "On the contrary," Owen added, "I've spent 40 years asking her to sing louder, to let the whole world hear what I was fortunate enough to discover in a small Wyoming church." The wedding took place on the ranch, under the same aspen trees that had witnessed Owen and Melody's vows, though these were now tall and stately, their leaves shimmering in the June breeze. All of Broken Creek turned out for the celebration, many of them the children and grandchildren of those who had attended that long-ago church social, where a young woman had been mocked for her singing, and a solitary cowboy had asked her to sing beside him anyway. As evening fell and lanterns were lit for dancing, Melody found herself standing slightly apart, watching her family Thomas teaching his youngest daughter to two-step, the twins engaged in animated conversation with old friends, Lily radiant in her bridal gown as she danced with her new husband. Owen appeared at her side, offering a glass of punch with a twinkle in his eye. "No broken bowls this time," he teased, referencing the incident that had started it all. Melody laughed, accepting the drink. "I was just thinking about how much has changed. Broken Creek, our family, the world itself." And how much remains the same? Owen countered, nodding toward the musicians, their grandchildren and their friends, playing instruments they had learned at Melody and Owen's knees, performing songs that had been passed down through generations. The music goes on, Melody agreed, her heart full. Later that night, after the last guest had departed and the family had retired to their respective rooms, Owen and Melody stood together on the porch of the house that had sheltered their love for 4 decades. Sing for me, Owen requested quietly, an echo of that first request so long ago. Just for me. And Melody did, her voice carrying across the land they had nurtured together. A land that had in turn nurtured them. She sang of love and loss, of hope and homecoming, of a journey neither of them could have imagined when they first stood side by side at a battered upright piano in a frontier church hall. When the song ended, Owen took her in his arms, holding her close against the cool night air. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, now streaked with silver like his own. "For the song?" she asked. "For everything," he replied. "For every note, every day, every memory. For singing beside me when I thought I would always walk alone." They remained there, wrapped in each other's arms under the vast Wyoming sky, two voices that had found their perfect harmony in the unlikeliest of places. The mockery of that long-ago church social had faded into insignificance, overshadowed by the life they had built note by note, day by day, a symphony of love that would echo long after their own voices were silenced, carried forward in the music of generations to come. And in that moment, as on countless others throughout their shared journey, they knew with absolute certainty that some songs are simply meant to be sung together.